Before you start,
Yes, please.
I would like to introduce Dave to you guys. Um, how long ago we've known each other? 15 years?
Yeah, I think so.
15, 20 years? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we met at the Red Cross.
Yes.
We both came from similar backgrounds in certain ways and stuff. And uh, and then you, of course, went for the big plane company and stuff like that. But we worked together in communications and stuff in the Red Cross for a number of years. And uh, I would just Dave Okrent is his name, and he taught me, got my extra for me. He had class at the Red Cross, and and it was a very knowledgeable guy to help me out a lot. So we met for dinner here a couple of weeks ago, and he told me about this program, and I thought, boy, this would be interesting to everybody to take advantage of, at least to hear it. And then this is just not going to be a teaching, Elmer. This is going to be interaction, questions, answers, bouncing. If you think he's full of crap, pardon, should I say that on the recording?
It's okay.
Yeah, be open and talk and go from there. So, David, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you asking me to talk on this topic. Over the years, I've expressed pieces of this in different places um and it's interesting how it goes over or doesn't go over as the case may be. The original discussion I had with Roland. By the way, when you ask questions, I'll break to ask questions, or if you want to chime in, that's fine. I just can't see the chat, so just make sure you don't put anything in chat because while my presentation's up, I can't see it. So, like I said, this is kind of bringing together a number of pieces I've been talking about for a while. And of course, I'll just say the opinions expressed in this presentation are those of of me and may not reflect the thoughts of the club or clubs here, or or the ARRL. This is just me and my opinions, and I am not saying I'm correct. I'm just showing you my opinions. I could be totally wrong. So with that in mind. This is, I call the survival tactics for the future of amateur radio and clubs, as it's part of that. And we'll see where this takes us. And what we're going to do is first talk really quickly about the threats. I won't go into a lot of a lot of discussion on threats. I think they're well known. And then we can start talking about the response to those threats. And it's going to be, especially towards the end, much more interactive. And I'll be asking for your opinions I'm not even asking, I'm asking you now. Feel free to jump in with at the right times when you feel like you have something like to add. Again, just give me a heads up so I know that you need some time. So I think the first question is with this group is what do you perceive the amateur radio will be like in the 10, 25, or 50 years um, as far as growth goes? So when you think about these times frames, I'll just open it up really quickly. What do people think we are in the next 10 years, 25 years, or 50 years?
Moderate decline.
Moderate decline, okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree with that. We're
Okay.
losing if you go into any of the meetings um, and look around the room where there's either no hair or gray hair, and I'm a no hair, so it's an aged community that's slowly. In fact, we just lost this morning. We just lost a past president of SnoVARC to cancer in Spokane. He's a
Hmm,
silent key as of this morning, Mel Ming.
that's unfortunate. Yeah,
Well,
and as we're going to
good
go in,
guy.
there's a lot of PR that almost makes indicate that your opinion about being moderate decline is wrong. So if you look carefully at some of the PR, especially from the ARRL and other sources, on one level, they're not acknowledging that, at least the opinion of people on board here right now. But we'll get into that in a second. I've had a discussion, actually forced them about 7 years ago to make a correction in QST because of how they were presenting this. Um, so the first threat, obviously, as we just talked about, is the aging population. There are about 755,000 U.S. operators. The average age is 68 years for ARL members and 52 years for non-members. That discrepancy of age, which doesn't look very big, is big enough to ask the question, there's a relevancy problem here. People who are older, who've been with the ARL probably for a while, versus people who are a bit younger, there may be a difference in what they find as relevant and the importance of that organization. But that's not for here. It's just something when I saw this, I said, that's as a marketer, this is something interesting to me. So this is U.S. Canadian Amateur Radio Operators Age Distribution Survey done by the Radio Amateur Radio Society of Canada. It was extrapolated to U.S., but I think it's pretty accurate. I've done another graph with AI helping me out, which was very similar to this. Um, and so what I want to show is that in the youth area, which they will talk as 29 below, it's about 3%. It should be 4%. I didn't correct that from the previous chart I had, but 4%. And then we have 64% that are above 60 years old. So when you look at that, you can see this skew, and this skew means we're aging out. As we all know, this just state the obvious, we're all aging out of this hobby, and that has a big impact. So the thing going a little bit deeper, when I looked at the 2015 data, 727,000 amateur radio operators, 744,000 in 24, 25, 755. It gives us a 10-year estimated growth if these numbers are close enough at about 2.8%, which is an annualized growth of 0.28%. But when you do some other research, there are other sources that say the annual growth rate is 1%. Which compared to some other hobbies like model trains, Civil War reenactment, it's actually not bad. It's probably in the same ballpark, but we're all suffering from the same problem. So if I go to the FCC database as presented a couple of days ago on the ARL website, we can see that there are 738,614 ham radio operators. So you can see there's kind of a discrepancy. But the thing I want you to take away is that there's essentially been very little, if any, growth since 2015. And we can see that we have about as many techs and novices, if you add them together, as we do general and advanced and extra. They're almost about equal if you separate them that way. And so what do we know about this as we dig a little deeper? We know that the attrition rate for 60 plus age group is about 2.5 to 3.4% per year. So think about that. There's an obvious thing that's coming out here. You can see it from left to right. What does that mean? It means that with the higher attrition, when factoring in active versus non-active hams in 60 plus categories, that 2.5 to 3.4% is actually probably higher. And therefore, the growth rate, 0.3% to 1%, whichever figure you want to use, is below the attrition rate. And at best, and I'll really say that this is stretching, but at best, we're at zero population growth. So that's the facts. We live these facts. We see these facts, but until you see them on paper, it sometimes doesn't show the dramatic effect that the aging is having. Any questions or comments here? Okay, again, no surprise, but all of a sudden when you see the facts and figures in front of you, it becomes much more dramatic what's happening. And I'm just going to do a quick, I should have taken this out. I tend to digress sometimes, no surprise. But here's a quick 2-second one. The ARL is already experiencing declining membership. In fact, if you read the last email from the board meeting, they pointed it out. The declining membership due to attrition means less revenue for programs, less revenue for the ARRL, and it's possible newer hams are not seeing the relevance of the organization, so therefore they do not join it as readily as other hams 10 or 15 years ago were joining ARL. So the declining population, the declining relevancy of the ARL in some cases is causing a decline in membership. So again, you got to look and say, well, where is the relevancy problem? How do we deal with that? So that's a sidebar. But the ARL needs to start thinking wider about things and looking at it from a different point of view. And one method to increase the membership is to work with vendors, especially those who advertise, to provide ARL members a 5% discount on orders, let's say of $50 or more, for exchange for slightly lower ad rates. Well, or work with ARRP or AAA or somebody else to create a bundled deal that gets more people joining the RRL because there's a higher benefit for them. So just asking, saying to the ARL, you've got declining membership. You need to do something about that. If you're interested, you need to start thinking more out of the box than, hey, we need to get more people signed up. You need to start thinking about how to get, why people don't sign up more likely. Then, we also tend to have an automatic knee-jerk reaction that we need to get more youth into the hobbies. But let's look at the demographics of what happens with youth. So You can get a license between 29 and lower. Usually we're talking about between 10 and 19 years of age, at 1% of the population. People in high school, middle school, maybe early college, they get a license. Then between the ages of about 20 to 50, the majority of them are inactive and they let their licenses lapse. Why? Because life happens. You're building a career, you're building a family, you don't have as much free time, you don't have as much free income, and so you tend to become more inactive where your license lapses. And then somewhere in the area of 45 to 60, some part of the original people of that got licensed as a youth returned to the hobby. Not all of them, just a fraction of them. So when you look at this from a long-term survivability point of view of the hobby, and you look very quickly, it doesn't mean to ignore youth. It means that is not probably going to be the area that's going to help you survive. Their life, it's way too long, a timeline, and they leave the hobby for a good deal of time with only a fraction returning. So it's not a really good lifeline to keep the hobby active and going and growing. So, and it's not just a US population, and this is what I haven't read is really, really important. As of 2015, Japan had approximately 435,000 licensed amateur radio operators. That's down, it should be sorry, from 1.3 million, and 70% of them are over 60 years old. That's where we are going. Look at that. From 2015 to 2000, 15 years. That's a lot of people no longer in the hobby. It's very sobering. Great Britain, 61,000 licensed operators above average age of 71. Germany, 61,000, average age of over 70. China and Thailand, and the footnote in 2021, 2022, statistics are growing, but the European and US North America area is not. And you can see that we are actually in slightly better aging shape than these Great Britain or Germany, but and Japan. But the fact remains, this is where we are going. There's nothing that I can see that says you're going to be able to change this trend. You may be able to mitigate the rate of fall, but you may probably most likely cannot stop the fall, most likely. And that's my unprofessional opinion. Any questions or comments about this? And feel free to disagree with me. Then there's also the declining participation of licenses. So about 25%, this is again a little bit of research, could be a little higher, could be a little lower. Yes, it's hard to get good research on this, but about 25% of more of hams are inactive. They're inactive because family commitments, they're in their careers we talked about, they have income problems where they cannot uh, afford equipment potentially. They have maybe health issues. They are no longer able to actively operate because of sight or hearing or disability, whatever the case may be. They may lack access to the hobby. They may have lost the ability to have access to the hobby, or they have other interests that have now eclipsed the hobby. They just maintain the license in case they ever want to go back or a casual use. But this is showing declining participation of licensees. And then when we have this coupled with aging, you can see the rate of decline of membership in the hobby is falling significantly. And then loss of relevance. So the excitement of hearing and talking to people from other countries is no longer relevant given cell phones, internet access. A lot of us started listening to shortwave broadcasts or AM DXing, and we got into the hobby that way. That's very traditional. Or we had a ham down the road or something, or in the family. And but that's no longer relevant. Lack of exposure to the hobby from a perspective that's contemporary and motivating. You cannot use the things that motivated people 30 years ago to people who are existing as digital citizens today and expect them to be motivated. So saying the things that we said before just don't work. It doesn't land as a contemporary message. And also we're competing with robotics and IoT, which are the hot alternatives with youth, it's a college-bound advantage over amateur radio. You get more credits being in robotics and IoT if you're going down the technical side, engineering, for example, than you would with amateur radio. So these are things that we have to remember. We're losing our relevance. Even in MCOM, some MCOM areas are now phasing out the use of amateur radio operators and amateur radio backup systems in some areas of the country. The RF noise floor. Again, we all know the threat. RF noise in homes and towns and cities is making it difficult to near impossible for HF stations to hear HF stations in your local shack. You got high noise levels, you're less likely to turn on your radio or advance to general. And so you're demotivated to stay on the air or stay licensed or upgrade. And the lack of diversity, and this is, I think, something to consider. When a person doesn't see others like themselves in amateur radio, especially in clubs, they may be less likely to join or be active in the hobby. This doesn't mean, I want to really be key on this. This doesn't mean that amateur radio is purposely putting up barriers. It just means that we come from most amateur radio operators come from specific demographics, and they're not necessarily, they don't historically haven't represented a lot of different minorities. And so the question I have for you guys is, do you think diversity is important to sustain the future of amateur radio? I know you're out there. I hear you breathing. Or you could disagree with me. I mean, it's okay. I'm just thinking this is where I am.
I think in the Northwest, um, I I don't want this to sound bad, but I don't know if it's that important. If you look at all the clubs that I've been involved in, um, a lot of the folks are just white, and just because of the Northwest, I'm sure it's different in different parts of the country. I think diversity is critical at anything, absolutely. But I don't know how much it is the gain or fail of ham radio. One of the points I wanted to make when you were talking before, if I may, is that the American Red Cross was big into communications, big into radio. We did all sorts of work there. And then all of a sudden, National said, we're not going to use it anymore, ham radio. And so that a lot of us really had to sit back and think, is this what we want to continue with? If it's not, and they pulled all the radios and all their vehicles and all the radios that were stationed in all the buildings, and it all went down. And they said, we're going to use cell phones. We're going to use satellite phones. Well, anybody in the business knows that cell phones are going to be gone. Satellite phones are going to be absolutely swamped during an event. So you just have to smile and say, okay, it's a decision. Now I have to make a decision. But that, again, points directly the point David just made is people are not using it anymore.
I'm gonna dovetail into that a little bit. I
Sure.
don't know that the question is necessarily diversity. It's just that there are so many other alternatives right now that have an easier uh, barrier to entry. You can spend a couple $100 and buy a Starlink Mini and plug that into a small backpack battery and go hike anywhere, and your phone still is relevant. Which, I mean, I have 3 children, and I think they would lose their mind if they didn't have their phones. So I think that barrier entry is just so much easier. I don't know that it has anything to do necessarily with diversity, um, because amateur radio is yes, there are some barriers to get into it, some cost barriers, especially if you want to get into nicer equipment, but you can spend what, $30 and get into a cheap radio. And so I don't know that I disagree with that statement, but I don't know that I agree with the statement.
I I accept that. I look at it, first off, I'm looking at the hobby as a whole, not just MCON. Um, and the second thing is, um, I'm a we have a lot of inflexibility in contests, for example. So if you have a religion that does not do work or on Sunday or Saturday or just certain times of the year, and all your contests are on Saturdays and Sundays, then you've excluded people from the contests who can take advantage of those. versus structuring the contest so there are mini contests inside of that weekend. So people who are not able to do Saturday can do Sunday and vice versa in a mini contest within a contest. That is accepting, and that becomes more open, for example, to amateur radio operators or to attracting people and keeping them who may not may have that limitation. So I'm throwing it out there to start thinking that we may have an untapped source or a source we haven't fully tapped to increase the ranks in the amateur radio hobby because we tend to associate with groups and such that we belong to other than amateur radio that probably are similar in structure and look than we are. And so therefore, or the majority of people are in the hobby, and therefore we may be limiting our avenues for getting more people into the hobby. And that's what I'm really stimulating here is that thought. So, and again, it could be, we're fine. It could be we're not. I'm just throwing out the question as well.
Yeah, I don't I
Go.
hear what you're saying,
Hmm.
and I think there are a few challenges that you actually have outlined that I think might hold more water in my mind. But I don't know that necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying diversity is a bad thing at all.
No, no, I get that.
What I'm saying is that when I put my blinders on and I say, why aren't people joining it? It's not because this is like a technology that has been relegated to a particular skin color. It's not. It's not relegated to a particular group. It's not. In my neighborhood, uh, people people have certain, and I'm not a political guy, so please understand that. But in my neighborhood, people are interested in taking care of one another, and there are just easier ways of communicating than ham radio. Um, there are some
Absolutely.
people that are more than willing to go down the GMRS route
Mhm.
because of the lower cost of entry, and to be quite honest, they can get it's a little easier, and they're willing to put that much energy into it. Um, we have here in North Bend, one of our North Bend members, Randy, who actually runs his neighborhood GMRS repeater out of his house. And it is a neighborhood repeater because of where they're located. If there is a problem, say let's say a fire or earthquake, um, those folks are virtually trapped by way of the way the roads are set up. And so Randy was able to um, get people to all agree that this was a good thing and allow him to maybe bend some of those HOA rules just so that everybody, regardless of financial ability, color, anybody in the neighborhood. And matter of fact, it's open to most of all of North
Yeah,
Bend.
and
So
and and I get that and I appreciate that. And I'm looking at this as a marketer, which is what my major profession was. And I look at where are the untapped or underserved market. That's all I'm looking at is that, oh, here's a potential market that may be able to boost the ranks. And so that's where I was coming from, not
and
at
I,
that
I
level.
understand and agree. And I would say that if we started a program where we um, paid for testing and handed out $35 ham radios, we could maybe change those numbers in given areas. The cost of entry to some people is going to look like it's a problem, even though it really isn't. But if I can just pick up my cell phone and or run it through an internet, then that's why. So
Yeah,
I
and
I, I rest.
I'm gonna I appreciate the comment and again, what you're mentioning is what the other threat was, which is are we no longer relevant or we have not expressed the relevance to people in modern terms that makes them more motivated to join the ranks.
Yeah.
So threat six, which is the which is the 90 it's you may have heard this as 80/20, In volunteer organizations, I believe it's 90%, 5%, which is 90% of the work work needed to sustain a club is done by 5% of the people. So that begs the question, what happens when those people burn out or retire? Where are the people? We're having, I can tell you, in some of the clubs I talk to and my own club, getting people to take an office or run an activity, even with 300 members at Mike and Key, is difficult.
Mm.
Is difficult. So as that group of core people begins to retire, burn out, or die, to put it bluntly, are there people who are ready to take those ranks and make that happen? So that's a big factor, because even if you any size club that is or any type of volunteer organization, this is a big factor. And when our ranks are naturally have a higher attrition rate, that becomes more and more a problem, I think, as we go forward into the future. Um, so those are the top threats. There may be other threats. The major threat, I think, is always going to be aging and relevance to me. But everybody could have their own view. I just put down what I think are, primary, secondary, tertiary, et cetera, threats. So what's our response? The answer is I have no idea. I'm going to throw out some opinions. I'm not an expert in this area. But, we'll have a little bit of dialogue and I'll throw out some ideas. The first thing, again, I'm going to throw out I'm a marketer by profession. So I think first like a marketer, and second as a biomedical electronics person and a salesperson, et cetera. So the thing it's what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So there's little or no, from my point of view, there's little or no marketing type data on the public perception of amateur radio with respect to items such as awareness of the hobby, how they perceive it, with respect to its relevance, reputation, cost, and accessibility. So, I think on QSO today, I think the host, and unfortunately my brain just went blank on, Eric. Eric will say, he says, amateur radio, are people still doing that? Is one of his opening introductory remarks. And that's because we look like a bunch of Civil War reenactors to a lot of people. They don't know what we are. They don't have a lot of exposure. It's something that they saw in old movies somewhere, at the most. So I think we don't know what the public perception is. And if we don't know what the public perception is, we cannot, at least me as a marketer, I am not really good at creating a campaign design to address the perceptions, address the relevancy, et cetera, if I don't know enough about the people I'm trying to talk to and their perceptions of the hobby. So data is needed to do this. We need to and I would say the ARL should be investing heavily into this type of data. If they ever ask, I'm sure I'll happy to tell them I can write a research brief for them. But we need to have this data if we're going to start really expanding on the hobby. Data is needed on why people get a license. This is basically, okay, they know about amateur radio, they've gotten a license, but let's dig deeper into why they got the license other than the superficial part. How they use it or not use it. Let's doing almost a 3-month and 24-month check on new licensees. And then what are their demographics? And doing the same regarding license upgrades. Why do people upgrade? When in their careers do they update? Are they utilizing the new privileges that they upgraded to? What is it? What is that whole reason? Because if we're going to design a way to keep this hobby relevant and expanding even at the higher attrition rate, if we can, we need this kind of information. We need better situational awareness, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, it's a great role for the ARRL. I don't really see them stepping up to do that, but I think it's a great role for them. So threat one, let's talk about population decline. So we need at least 3.5% growth to maintain our current levels. So if we go with the attrition rate that we talked about earlier, and accepting also potentially this may be a little higher, that we need a little bit higher because of people who are inactive but have licenses, then you can see that we need 26,000 new hams to keep at zero population growth. And we would need another 20,000 to 37,000 additional new licenses a year to grow at 3 to 5%. Take that in. That's 47,000 to 64,000 new hams a year. And you take that and think about that from the point of view, okay, 50,000 hams per year, 50 states, we need 1,000 hams per state. Good luck. Essentially, the difficult level is high. So when you look at these numbers and what has to be done, I'm now going to ask you guys really quickly, what does that mean to you? What do you think?
So,
I'm sorry, Christopher, let me just go real quick. I think in today's world, it's probably unattainable, just because of what you just were saying. And one of the problems that has happened in the past, it kind of correlates, is for those licenses that people do get, they don't get any further training. And that's the thing we used to scream about a lot. And they get a license, they don't know what radio to buy, they don't know how to run the radio, and so they lose interest. They put the radio in the drawer, and that's the end of that. So you may have a physical license, and that's the thing that's always irritated me about the ARRL is they're looking for numbers. But if you took the numbers of hams that are there, the ones you quoted, if there's a way you could extrapolate the active hams, semi-active hams, it would probably even shock you more.
Yeah. Somebody else had a comment?
Well,
So,
go ahead.
so I think that ham, as it has traditionally been practiced, I think that getting that level is absolutely impossible. People, you aren't going to find that many people who are going to want to do 1950s style ham radio per year. But I think there are a lot of new things that people are doing that are not the traditional ham. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that may not get, because they aren't amateur licensed using the amateur bands, they don't get included. But I think that they are proximate to what we do. The people who are experimenting with Meshtastic and even setting up, like, using it for remote instrumentation and communications networks. There are people running BBSs on Meshtastic. There are definitely communities of GMRS out there that, if they were rolled in and considered part of the hobby, we might not have quite the same attrition that we're seeing in classical ham.
And you're going to find out shortly, Ian. I'm not too far off from you there, on my opinion. Um, I'm going to say very clearly, we cannot maintain zero population growth. We cannot, therefore, if we can't maintain ZPG, then we cannot grow the 3 to 5% that you would like to see, we'd like to see. What we can do is begin asking the question differently. We just admit we're not going to grow. We're going to go the same way Japan has gone.
Mhm.
What we need to do is start thinking, how do we mitigate the rate of decline? We accept that there's a decline, but we now mitigate the rate of decline. So we'll get into some of the things, Ian, you're just talking about in a minute, but I just want to let this sink in, is that we need to remember we can't fight this trend, most likely. What we can do is try to reduce the rate of the trend. And that's at least for now, at least that's my opinion for now.
Right. And I agree actually with what you said there. There's no motivator for new people to explore the hobby. Um, as long as the lights are on and the cell phones are up, people won't change because they don't have a reason to change. And I've said this at our local club just the other day. I'm like, heaven forbid we ever have something bad happen, but like people will change their opinions on a lot of things when the lights go out and the power goes out and they don't have other options for communications.
So I'm gonna go out on a radical limb here, and I'll just say that the term that we've motivated people with when all else fails is absolutely wrong.
Okay.
It's no longer relevant.
Hmm.
And yes, when people experience, like I've had two complete cellular and Comcast outages in the 6 months I've been in Bonnie Lake. That lasted for 2 days, a day to 2 days. And I will tell you that there probably were people going like, wow, I think I heard something about amateur radio. I could get, or something else and I can get on there. And then the minute lights go on, they have forgotten that they were interested. So the activation energy can drop very rapidly after after the blackout, so to speak. But I really think we need to start thinking about it's, and I'm talking to kind of an MCOM group right now, but just understand that I'm talking about the greater population, those who are not necessarily interested in MCOM, but the motivation of when all else fails is no longer as relevant as it was in the 1960s and 70s.
Sure.
Um,
I agree with
um,
that.
W7ECK, is that you?
Yeah, that's me. Well, I never got into radio for MCOM or anything else. There was too many reality shows on TV, and I would rather talk around the world. And I started out as a tech, and then I made my own homebrew Yagi antenna and went through the satellites, and then I wanted more, and then went up to general, then I wanted more, and then I went up to extra. So MCOM is important, but it's a matter of I can spin on the radio, see what the band conditions are, and see who I can talk to around the world.
Yep. Yep. Okay, next is, so let's step back for a second and ask the question, what are the characteristics of our target market segment? So I'm looking at I have to throw in a Venn diagram somewhere, right? So here we go. So we have interest, we have time, we have income. There's that red zone. So let's talk about who exists in that red zone. Tell me who's in the red zone. Tell me the characteristics of the people in that red zone.
Retirees.
Retirees, okay. Anybody else? Any other characteristics?
Well, you can't say the youth because there's no income.
There's no actually no income unless they're a trust fund, baby.
Well, I mean, it's interest time and income comes to it for your initial, equipment.
So let me ask the question, what age group do you think is in the red zone?
Us.
Yep,
Okay,
the old
us,
fogies.
you're
The old
talking of
fogies.
45 and up.
60 and above, is that who you're talking about?
Yep.
Yep.
Any other comment on that?
I would lower it just a little bit to 45 and up.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, 45. I got into it about 42.
okay. So I just sort of jumped ahead. What age group is our target demographic? You just talked about it, right? We can either say 60 and above, which is what one of the comments or groups was, and the other is potentially 45 and above. I think that general consensus a second ago seemed to be that you guys were agreeing with 45 and above.
Yeah, it was
And
55.
55. So I should stay here. I believe that 45 to 55 is our target demographic. It doesn't mean we ignore youth. That's not what I'm trying to say. It means that my target demographic is 45 to 55 years old. That is who I want to have as much touch points as I can to evangelize the hobby with. Secondary to that, I may be happy to help with youth groups, but knowing that they're really not the lifeblood of our hobby for now. The lifeblood is the people who can meet that red zone. They have interest, they have time, and they have income. Let me put it this way. They have a technical interest, they're empty nesters or about to become empty nesters, and they have some disposable income. So you're talking about people who've established their careers, their kids are getting older or have left the house, and now they have time. So and some of them will be youth who are returning to the hobby at that age, as we talked about before, and some will be new hams. So I'm not going to go into everything here, but it's recruitment for 101 for a club. Obviously, and this is me, this is marketing 101, really. Know each of your audiences, because you may have multiple audiences that you're going after in your club. You need to look at their needs, wants, aspirations, and concerns. and that's where research is really helpful. You need to tailor one or two key motivational messages for each audience. So, so that means that if I'm talking to, let's say, four-wheel drive enthusiasts, I may have a different message, just focusing one thing specifically in the hobby or two versus talking about the entire hobby. Where their interests are, that's where my key motivational messages are for each audience. I want to create a 1 minute motivating elevator speech that speaks from the heart. So someone says, what's this about amateur radio? Can you tell me about it? Or you say, let me tell you about, what is your hobby? Oh, it's amateur radio. And I know 1 minute I can give them a motivating elevator speech. This is what's fun. I'm going to give you a quick story about this. I was called in many years ago to consult on the Seattle Opera. And I had a number of the board of directors there, not all of them, but a number of the key board of directors were there. And as we're getting information about this, what they want to do. And finally, I asked each one around the room to give me their story. What is their elevator pitch for the Seattle Opera? And after all of them the four or five of them who gave me their pitch, and I said, oh, if I took the name Seattle Opera out and I put any other company's name in, it would still read true. What did I hear? We are a premier organization. It was very corporate speak. And I said, can you tell me, and I pointed to one of the directors, tell me the first time you fell in love with opera. I got this fantastic, wonderful story from the heart. I asked another person, what was your time that you fell in love with opera? And we went around really quickly, and the light bulb went on in their heads, really, oh my God, I have not been talking to somebody. I've been preaching some abstract corporate speak to people. I wasn't connecting. I wasn't showing them what I feel and what they could feel. So when I talk about motivating elevator speech, it's from the heart. It's not facts, data. It's more about this is the feeling I get from this part of the hobby. This is why I enjoy the hobby. Not that you can do this, this, and this, but this is what I do. This is why I enjoy it. This is what's important to me. That's the elevator pitch within the context of the audience I'm talking to and what's motivating them that I want to do. And then test and fine tune the elevator speech. Build a set of presentations because you may be talking to groups. They could be 5-minute presentations and 15-minute presentations, and they can be easily customized to each audience that you're talking to with a call to action. So call to action is, what do you want them to do after they hear this? What are you going to give them as a path for the next thing they should do if they're interested? So that's how you structure this. You laid out a timeline, a pathway of activities, information, etc., to help someone move from the initial interest to first license, and you create supporting materials. This is the role of a club that wants to expand. Use standard marketing practices. You establish a group of members to manage that timeline. So when we have people starting to enter into this pathway, we have people there to support them and keep them moving through the pathway. We list all the groups where the members have connections and affiliations. This is important. You have a club of 5 people, 10 people, 300 people. They belong to other groups, which means they're great sources of where to connect to other people to make our hobby known and also to find what makes it relevant to that other group. And then you set up a campaign to touch each group and key individual. So this is what I want to outline is number 9. We're all ambassadors of this hobby. I'm doing PODA and someone comes up to me, are you talking to aliens? And I'm going like, yeah, I am. And, but I have a little business card that says interested in ham radio, and it gives the ARL landing page for them to get information, and I can hand it to them if they're interested. But that's just a very casual connection, but we're ambassadors of the hobby. So that's why it's important for club members, if you want your club to expand, to list all the groups where your members have connections and affiliations, and then you become the ambassador of the other two of ham radio to those other groups, where you have a support structure behind you. I have a pitch, I have presentations, I have a little handout if you need to, or a website that supports it. So you really create the information flow that lets people move through the hobby and the people to support them in that process. So before I go, any questions before we go on or comments? Okay. So assuming a person in this age group, 35 to 50-year-olds, which is 45 to 50 is what I said, but 35 to 50 really, if I want to be a little bit wider, is the target demographic from my point of view, has heard your pitch. They've given you a 1 minute from the heart pitch, and they show interest in ham radio. Now, what are the things they would express as potential barriers to getting a license and getting on the air? You've probably heard this before. It's called the yes, but. Yes, I think this is an interesting hobby. Wow, but I don't have what? What is that point of resistance?
License and radio.
Pardon me?
License and radio.
License and radio. I don't have a license. I don't have a radio. What's another barrier that
I would
someone's going to
say
express?
Time.
knowing the path to get to having a license and a radio, having an idea of having even a clue as to, well, what does it even involve buying a radio? Sort of
Or getting a
knowing,
license.
yeah, or getting a license.
Yeah. I don't know your name, W7ECK, so
And name here is Ken.
Ken, okay.
Yeah. I would say time.
Okay,
A
time.
lot of
actually-
people would say time. Do I have time to study to get a license? Do I have time to play in this hobby? Do I have time to program the radio?
Yep, those are all good things.
David,
So, go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes, Lynn.
Yeah, okay. There the light came on. Covenants, building covenants.
Yep. HOA,
Yeah, the
for
guy that
example.
Elmered me 45 years ago, W7DHC moved from Linden down to somewhere near Tacoma. And he was very active, 2 towers up, fantastic station, the whole shot. And he's trying to figure out right now how to get any sort of antenna up. And we're talking even VHF stuff because he's afraid of the covenants. And more and more groups have got covenants.
I understand. I moved into an HOA, which is, you should slap me on the hand. But when I run the month, I have once a month I run the TechNet for Mike and Key. My 4 foot or 5 foot vertical VHF UHF antenna is sitting here in the corner of this room, and that's what I'm transmitting on. It's actually sitting in the house. And hitting the repeater. So the things we talked about: time, money, test anxiety. Do I have space for it? Physical limitations, lack of support. I don't understand the pathway, which is why I outlined what's the pathway in the previous slides. So these are all things that we have to address. So when we talk about what's the next step, the person showing interest, we need to have the materials on hand, whether it's on the website, whether it's, a presentation, whatever it is, or just a conversation. Hey, I don't have enough time. Okay, well, let's talk about what you don't need a lot of time this is how much time you would need to get started. This is how much time to maintain. Well, how much money? Well, okay, this is the money situation. Well, I have test anxiety. Well, there are ways to fix that. Those who've taken classes from me know that I talk about in my classes how to overcome the test anxiety. And, just having, all these things. So as a marketer, when we look at all the resistances, we write what's called an FAQ. So we take frequently asked questions. So we say, here's the question I'm going to be asked. I don't have enough time. Here's the answer. I don't have enough money. Here's the answer. And so we write those all up because it helps us get into the right frame of mind when we're talking to people ahead of time, or we actually push them out and publish them so that people can see it who are interested. So just remember, when we're talking to the demographic we want to get to, we need to anticipate their resistance and be able to give them some reassurance that resistance can be managed, can be overcome. So I'm not going to go this now. This is something to think about when you sit down with your organizations, and I talked about this, is to list all the organizations each of you touches outside of amateur radio. It could be a church, could be a civic group, could be another hobby. Write those down and identify what in our hobby, amateur radio, would be relevant to them. Now let me design a campaign to talk to them based on that level of relevance. So you're targeting it down, narrow casting to that area, and then build yourself as a club, a campaign to go after those people, tuning the messages to their interests. So again, if you want your club to grow, it takes investment. And then here's the problem. Remember the threat, 90 versus 5. 90% of the work, 5% of the people, which means you cannot do this stuff if you only have 5% of the people doing the work. If you're committed to if your people are committed to growing your club, they're going to have to increase their ability to touch other people and motivate them to join. And if the club isn't interested in doing that, then you can just remember the club may not exist in 5 or 10 years. That's okay. Things live and things die. Let's talk about youth recruitment because that always comes up, even when I talk about 35 to 50-year-olds as the target, it always comes up. So let's look at the old school entry points to the amateur radio highway. Shortwave listening or AMDXing was always an interesting thing. People my age, maybe a little older, had the same experience. Family or friend was an amateur radio operator. I got exposed to an electronics class or a radio club at school that was part of electronics class. And of course, CB radio was a gateway drug for many people who then became amateur radio. Now, let me talk about electronic classes and radio clubs, which were aimed at the youth. Well, not aimed at them, but it was just in high school. A lot of this was happening. Problem is that a lot of electronics classes were locked in as shop classes in many high schools, and they've done away with a lot of shop classes, if not all of them, in many high schools. So electronics may not exist anymore in that high school at all. Whereas I took electronics in junior high, and I took junior high school electronics all through high school. So that doesn't really exist anymore. So that's something we have to think about. And excuse me. Possible new entry points, we've mentioned some of that already. Robotics and IoT. People are not aware that they are using radios sometimes. In fact, I remember my favorite thing is when one of my buddies, when we had interns at Boeing, we once a year they'd come into one room. We'd had talked to all the interns, and one part of it was us talking as the marketing department about the brand of Boeing. And this was years ago. He stood up and said, "Okay, how many people here are carrying hard drives in their pockets?" These are all college students. Nobody raised their hands. He says, "Is anybody carrying an iPod or something similar to an iPod Nano, whatever, the Nano, the original music thing?" And they all raised their hands. Well, did you know that's a hard drive? So you didn't know that that was a computer with a disk drive. You didn't realize that robotics and IoT is radio. A lot of it's radio. It's just invisible to them. Meshtastic, mesh core, of course. The maker movement. Whenever I teach a class ahead of time, when I'm advertising the class, I send notes out to all the maker organizations, the maker spaces around the Northwest, saying, "Hey, I'm teaching a class in amateur radio. This is a great thing for you guys to think about." CERT, which a lot of CERT people got trained in amateur radio. Some, not a lot, but a number of them did because they thought it was easy. I really think GMRS is where CERT should be, and FRS, and Meshtastic. But it's a gateway. GMRS and FRS is a gateway. These are all gateways. Anybody who's got an interest in radio, tangentially or directly, is a gateway to amateur radio. So that's one thing to consider is what are the other potential entry points are there? So think about, for your club, what are the ways that people start getting exposed to and interested in radio? Because these are potential entry points to amateur radio. And then here's a thought, and Ian, I think you were touching on this. You were getting ahead of my presentation. Maybe it's not an amateur radio club, but a radio communications club. Maybe it's time that we realize that we should morph. Instead of being an amateur radio group, we have become a radio communications group. Some of those radio communications people, Meshtastic, Meshcore people, will become amateur radio people. Some of them will not. But you're broadening the scope of the club. You're giving people more exposure. You're giving people more who are on the entrance ramps the ability to leave the entrance ramps and get onto amateur radio if they wish. But you're also supporting them because they are tangentially in the same business we are, communicating. So something to think about. Ian, vote for you. Go ahead, Bob.
Good luck getting the ARRL to get off their $30 million of cash that they're sitting on that one.
You know what? All I can say is I hope they know who's going to inherit who the beneficiary of the cash is when the ARRL ceases to exist in 25 or 50 years. But more importantly, this does not negate amateur radio. It just says we're broadening the horizons And so there's an amateur radio club within a radio communications club. Okay, you want to make that statement?
I don't disagree with anything that you're saying, but I think that's probably one of the elephants or gorillas in the room.
Yes, I don't disagree with you. I'm sure there are, if ARL people were on the table right now, they'd be jumping on the, I want to have make a comment. But this is what I mean is that what worked 20 years ago is not going to work today. And yeah, the sooner we wake up to that, the sooner that we can mitigate the reduction in the hobby. Not eliminate it, but mitigate it a little bit. So recruiting youth, it's a lot more complicated to engage youth. They're busy. Have you seen how busy a high school student is these days? It's incredible. Course design and instruction is different than for adults. You cannot teach children, high school students, middle school students, the same way you teach adults. You're not going to get a ham cram course down into their lexicon very well. It's not the way they work. And the way we teach, mostly lecture, very little hands-on in getting these courses done. It's done, memorize the questions, spit them out kind of thing. This is not instruction. Okay, this is not what we do today. Need to demonstrate relevance first. Again, you can't teach people if it doesn't look like it's relevant to them. The activities are important. I gotta fix the English here. Activities are important even before they're licensed. So getting them touching things, building things, even for adults really, keeps you motivated and on track that you want to get a license. It makes it real. Remember, when I was learning to teach adults, it's the law of I forgot now, maybe went blank, but the law of intensity. The more senses I engage in training, touch, smell, hearing, sound, it's visual, anything I can do to increase the number of senses when I'm teaching, whether it's verbally or through physical demonstration, is just going to enhance learning. And then we need to integrate radio into the science curriculums as a demonstration tool. If you're talking Earth's atmospheric sciences, space science, there should be radio right there. Robotics, we should raise the idea that radio is there. They're thinking, oh, I got my remote controller, IoT. They're not thinking radio, but when you start to tell them, hey, this is radio, this is what you can do. And by the way, this is what you can do when you move your frequency up or down. This is how this works and what you can do. So we need to this is some things that you're talking to youth and the people who are the gateways to youth, teachers and parents, you're really talking to them. Also, you could get a kid interested in ham radio, but if their parent isn't engaged, say, this is not going to help my kid get into college, you're not going to go anywhere with that. They're not going to have the support. So again, we can look at radio clubs. We can look at radio astronomy as part of the club. Radio camps, at different winter breaks or spring breaks or whatever. We can get kids involved without even being licensed and helping in public service communications. That's like the Explorer posts that I grew up with. People who are doing IoT, fox hunts. You don't need to be licensed to do a fox hunt. And you could make that, it's a type of geocaching, right? Kids gets out and get some exercise and do stuff. So we just said, if we're going to do it with the youth, we got to, again, talk to our audience, talk to the audiences that are gateways, or gatekeepers to them as well. So again, we just talked about what's a radio club. Radio is not amateur radio. As I said, any interest in radio is a potential gateway to amateur radio. So as I mentioned before, these are all the different ways of thinking about expanding a radio club into other areas because these are all gateways to amateur radio. Or vice versa, it's a way for amateur radio operators to say, hey, I've never thought of radio astronomy. I've never thought of weather sat reception. And I really like weather. How many amateur radio operators are heavy into weather? It's a natural thing, and of course, EMCOM support. You can use a youth or anybody to help an EMCOM support. It doesn't mean you have to be licensed all the time. You can be doing a lot of admin stuff for EMCOM support as you're learning to get your license.
One quick thought.
Way into radio, and that's software-defined radio. No
Yes.
license required. You can hear anything.
Absolutely. Receiving is non-licensed. So there's a lot of things you can do with receiving. There's something mystical, to be able to turn on your computer and an SDR receiver, throw up an antenna, and you're getting the weather satellite download. That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it is cool. You may be able to get it on the TV or off the internet, but it's cool when you can do it yourself. Okay? Even if it's a lousy picture, it's cool. Watching, getting information off of ADBS for aircraft and boats and watching that, that's cool for those who have interest in radio.
Yeah. One interjection here, real quick.
Yeah.
In our CERT classes out here in the Valley, at the final, not the final, but the final class, uh, we go in from our ham group, which is part of the CERT group out there, and we talked about radio. And one of the things, I can't take credit for the idea because it was given to me, but one of the ideas was we had about, probably the average person was probably 40 that was in a class, and I had a 19-year-old. And I started talking about radio, and you could see he was bored. And I finally says, "Well, you guys talk on radio every day." And they all look at me like I'm nuts. And I said, "Pull out your cell phones." They pull out their cell phones. So I said, "That is a radio. You're talking on it. Do you see any wires going to the wall? You're talking on it, going to the towers, which then, of course, goes on and on and on." And that 19-year-old, you could see the blood drain out of his face. He says, "You're serious?" I said, "Absolutely." I said, "That is a radio. So you've been using it since you've had a cell phone." And everybody just, that the point was mic fright. A lot of people have mic fright. And I said,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
talking on the ding thing all the time.
Yep, absolutely. People don't realize, they don't know what they don't know, right? It's invisible. That's the thing, is radio is invisible. I mean, literally and figuratively, to people. Also for youth, I'm a junior achievement model. There are other models like it where you are, if you want to go in that direction, you create in-school programs, not just radio programs, but radio in itself may be a program, but it could be about space weather. It could be about earth sciences. It could be about other things, astronomy, but robotics. But you go in and build a program, and you get teachers are become aware of it. In the JA model, they call up junior achievement, which is business oriented. They set up a volunteer who can come in once a week to teach a canned course under supervision of the teacher, and that works really well. I used to be a junior achievement in high school, but also I volunteered for junior achievement and did these programs in high schools in the Seattle area. And also they have an after-school program. So HS high school students create and operate in a junior achievement, a business under supervision of a set of JA volunteers. That's at least it used to be when I was there. Um, Again, what do we have an after-school program? We're going to be competing robotics and IoT stuff. So how do we dovetail with that? Or do we have something that is interesting enough, that's compelling enough for people to do after school, or for adults to do during a weekend? So keeping the youth in the, this is why I'm really saying that, okay, it's not our primary demographic, but a lot of people want to go in that direction. So here are the things. So we need to ask the question, why is it hard to keep youth in the hobby? How do we keep, it's not a matter of keeping youth in the hobby forever for their entire lives. It's recognizing that they're going to come and go out of the hobby. How do we make it easy for them to come and go? How do we also work with them to stay in the hobby as long as they possibly can? Again, reminder, I cannot see chat when I'm talking, so feel free to ask a question or share a comment. And then later on, we can get into, again, if we're going to go after youth, how do we keep the youth engaged as they get older? So same kind of thing. Declining participation. Excuse me. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into this, but what are the factors leading to declining participation? If you're interested in your club, take some time and brainstorm these next forms. Because again, when you're building a marketing campaign, which is what you're trying to do, to motivate and evangelize and get people into the hobby, you need to address these issues. So let's just throw out, anyone have a quick comment? What are some of the factors that you'd like to share that are about declining participation in the hobby? What is causing declining participation other than dying out of the hobby?
Information thing, excuse me, fun things for the members to do. I know some people have come to me and say, we're not doing enough variables within the club, so I have better things to do. So we're trying to,
Yes,
we're trying to fix that.
let me follow up with that. And your question to them is, what would be fun for you? And you get what?
Yeah.
Crickets. Crickets. So that's why, that's one of the times where we as club members who are in positions of action, we have to sit down with people and say, okay, you're not giving me some things to go by, But let me ask you some questions. Tell me about what you do in your hobby. Tell me things you wish you could do in the hobby. So they may not have the answer that they want off the top of their tongue, but if we invest the time, if they're willing to give us the time and say, wait, I need to spend 20 minutes and talk to you because I need to dig into this to find out what's fun for you, what's missing for you. And eventually people, I find that for the most part, when you make that connection, people will begin to dig down deeper and give you better answers. Another comment?
I think that one of the things that can be an issue I've seen in other types of groups is simply if they don't see people being enthusiastic and having fun with it, then they're just going to stop hanging out with the people. There are people who will follow people who are having fun because they're having fun, and that will lead them into doing more things, but they won't be the spark of enthusiasm. And if nobody else is that spark, then they just kind of fade out.
Yep, that's true. I'm going to say something kind of it just came to mind that on this that's not necessarily part of this chart, but it illustrates it. Um, I had very rarely do I find a club presentation that I didn't already know. So if you're an extra and you've been around for a while, there's very little new stuff being presented, um, which is a problem from my point of view. But also QST magazine, it's the same articles every year. Essentially, it's the same articles every year, and it's not to me a very living magazine. I think they need to think broader and deeper in some respects. Anyway, that's why I say that everything in this presentation is an opinion. So the biggest thing that supports active operators, and Ian, you mentioned it basically, is social connection. Excuse me if my voice is starting to go. And we think, oh, club meetings, that's the way to go. But club meetings are necessary, but they're not sufficient to maintain social connection. Once a month for an hour, 2 hours is not a social connection, especially these days when a lot of us are on Zoom. It doesn't really give you a lot of social connection. So activities are great, but now you have to help people get there, especially we're 60 plus. So it takes a lot more energy to get us out of our chair, right? For some of us. So you need to have carpools. You need to have buddies that help, motivate each other to come. You need to think about if they need an access bus and do we coordinate that? Other things. How do we help people get to the activities and participate? How do we get to socialization, which is the step why I say clubs are sufficient, necessary but not sufficient. We need more socialization. Some clubs do this, small group meetings, meals before or after a club meeting or between club meetings. Friends, I should put this in fiends. I gotta do some bell check on this. Friends doing friends doing POTA together, not just sitting there by yourself in a park, but bringing some people together non-ham volunteer activities. That's something that we need to explore. How is the ham club supporting the community around it? Are we going to food banks and helping there? Are we doing, again, when you're doing it as a group, you're waving the flag, you're showing you're being your ambassadors, you're exposing people to things. Visiting the sick or homebound hams. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a ham living up in Port Townsend, I think, in a old home for old sailors or something. And he used to be very active on the nets. And the reason is the local club came in and basically built an antenna in his windowsill for him to be able to contact the repeaters. And that was his lifeline. Uh, and so those are some of the things. And phone a ham, which is if you're members of the club officers, divide the club up into sections, and each of you club officers take a list that's assigned to you and keep connection with that ham radio operator. Haven't seen you for a month and a half. How you doing? Any new connections you're making? Hey, why don't you come on the net soon? We'd like to hear what you're doing, share what's going on, or do you need any help with anything? That's connection. It's all about connection. And then helping also as a club addressing needs of physically impaired members help them stay on the air. So having somebody on who's available to say, oh, this is just these are software you could use to stay on the air if you're blind. This is what you can do if your hands are so full of arthritis you can't operate some things anymore. Here's some adaptive things that can be done. So these are areas again to help continue with socialization, social connection, and maintaining connection in the hobby. This really leads us to what I call Ham for Life. And by the way, this is turns out this is somebody's email address, Ham for Life. It's Mark is now down in Salem now, but W7EAK. Or am I just repeating somebody else's call sign now? EA something. So moving to retirement or assisted living communities shouldn't end being active in the hobby. And this is crazy. You know, when you think about it, I've been in the hobby, you know, people have been in the hobby for 30, 40 years. It's been very important to them. They go into a retirement community or assisted living communities and they have to get rid of their equipment. They're done. Something that was really important to them, they're done. Why? Clubs can support people obtaining assistive devices to help with ham radio. We need to investigate that. Work with the retirement communities to establish a cooperative radio shack. You know, by the way, great net controllers for disasters is people sitting in retirement homes. You know, provide access to remote stations. I'm now accessing a remote station just east of Portland to operate because I don't have the ability to put up an antenna. I do a lot of POTA and things like that, but at home, if I want to casually operate, I'd use a remote station now that someone's letting me use. Support providing CAM classes, testing, and get-togethers in the facility itself. So you get a couple of hams that are assisting in these facilities and you get them back in their hobby, they will begin teaching classes. They will begin evangelizing. They will be able to start putting people in the hobby. This is, again, this is not an idea that this is not our target demographic for new hams. This is saying if you are a ham radio operator that was important to you, there's no reason why you can't continue the hobby when you're in assisted living communities if you're physically able. And it could be as simple as being able to listen. Sometimes that's all that can keep the connection. And
What we're-
keeping them, showing them how to connect onto the club meetings by Zoom and things like that, or having them come on the access bus and helping them get to the club meetings or other events. So we need to think about this. This is along the same line, forming a club morale, welfare, and recreation team. Ham radio is the connection and community is the focal point. So we need, again, how do we keep the interest? A small group of people who are liaisons for 5 or 10 club members, just kind of like I discussed on the previous slide. They make regular contact with members if the member wishes. They collaborate with their team to increase morale, boost airtime, explore new parts of the hobby, and to help the team create a supportive and active community. So the club changes from a passive organization, essentially, that's saying, come to field day, we got a contest, to, hey, we're a community, we look after each other, we develop each other, and we support each other in a much more rounded and holistic way than just about, I'm on the radio, I'm just on the net. So we have to think broader that as we all get older and we want to maintain hobby and we want to maintain community in this endeavor. I'm going a little faster because I want to finish up soon, but let me just finish this and I'll take some comments. The other thing I was thinking about is the Federation of Pacific Northwest Amateur Radio Clubs. So remember, clubs are going to be shrinking. There's no doubt about it. Clubs will be shrinking overall over time. So you need an organization to support and promote amateur radio as well as to coordinate activities and share resources across the regions. As clubs age and shrink, they can pool talent and resources to help them continue their respective missions. So in other words, as you get smaller and you need help, let's say you don't have all the skills necessary to maintain the repeaters, the club next door might. Okay? Somebody, if an hour away could help. So examples, we can have local test equipment pooling, equipment loaning programs, coordinated classes and testing, open access to presentations of their events. There should be no reason why I have to be a member of a club to hear someone's presentation. Should be open to everybody. Because we should be one community. So there was a comment. I didn't want to forget that.
Yeah, no, we're doing here, well, two things. What we're doing here at Providence Point, which is a 55 plus community retirement community. When I came on board, I got involved with the emergency response committee right off the bat, found out they had a radio room. And so I went up to the radio room and looked at it. It had a commercial radio, and it had a 2 meter 440 radio to talk. So I said, "What do you use these for?" "Well, we do twice twice a month check-ins, and that's it." Yep. So the more I thought about it, the more I talked to people, I came up with the idea of setting a radio club here. It's not a ham club. It's going to be a radio club. So if you have interest in FRS, GMRS, ham, whatever it is, it's just really new. And so I have to go through the proper channels to be able to get their blessing, of course, to be able to put a club there. But if we only have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 people that are interested, that's fine. And we'll incorporate doing radio, we'll incorporate going out for breakfast, we're having coffee breaks, and all that sort of stuff. And so again, like you said, it'll be a little bit social in nature. And then on the second half of what I wanted to mention really quick on this Pacific Northwest Amateur Radio Clubs, we're working together pretty well with Issaquah now, and we're trying to get together with Ian and the group up in North Bend more, and with the Snoqualmie group to be able to work in exactly what you were describing. And we're all kind of in the quote unquote valley, if you will, different valleys, but the power is in numbers, and numbers are there, and with the knowledge to share. And I think it's a brilliant thing to do, and I think it's the future as we all start to slowly dwindle and be able to cross support each other. I think it's great. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And I may say this in a few seconds, I don't remember, but as clubs begin to shrink, they should merge. Anyone within a certain geographical area should start thinking about, okay, when we hit, hey, only 10 people are coming to the club, but next door to us, 10 miles away, there's another club with 15 people. Let's merge. Let's get, and by that merger, we get economy of scale, so to speak.
Mm.
How can we motivate technicians to increase airtime in advance? Because that's one of the problems is we have people who are technicians who are barely on the air, as we've mentioned, if they are at all once they get their license, and they're not advancing. Now, it's okay to stay a technician. I'm not saying you have to advance because there's lots of things you can do as a tech, so it's fine. But this is our lifeblood. We want a progression. And so we need to start digging into how do we find out why they're not doing not getting on the air. So I'm going to suggest, and I'm an instructor, and this is a lot of work for me, but I'm going to say this on the rare times that I'm teaching. Instructors could follow up with the graduate technicians at 6, 12, and 18-month intervals to see if they need support. Are you on the air? Why aren't you on the air? How do I help you get on the air? Directing them to clubs, special topic sessions, holding a graduate net every quarter. Hey, I'm going to bring all my students together on one net and come in and we'll talk and we can make contact. How do I find you in Elmer? As another thing, this is the second time I'm getting ready to do an HF, and you'll all get notes on this somewhere along the line. My second time doing the HF 101 primer course for 3 hours on Zoom. Everything you want to know about getting on HF, but we're afraid to ask, so to speak. I had 70 people sign up for that last time. So there's an interest there. I wish I had time. I didn't unfortunately have a place to do a practical session. Otherwise, I would have done a follow-up practical. But we need to start thinking about how do we find out why the techs are not using their radios. I mean, the generals and advanced and extra is probably the same question for them as well. But at least we have a big cadre of people in the tech area that we can see what's going on. How do we help? How do we direct? Relevance. We need, I'm not going to go into this tonight, but this is something to do as a group. Brainstorm. What would make amateur radio relevant today? As I mentioned, adjunct interest in atmospheric and space sciences would be interesting. Relatively inexpensive, so I mentioned MCOM when hiking, backpacking, or four-wheel driving. That's again coming back to when all else fails. But hey, it's still something worthwhile. If I'm backpacking and, I'm going to be out of cell phone coverage, I'm not going to be in mesh-tastic range most likely either. I throw a J-pole, roll up J-pole in the tree, attach it to my handheld, and I'm going to find somebody out there to talk to if I have an emergency. So this is something you might want to do with your clubs, is to start brainstorming what would make it relevant given, and you might want to break this down, given 35 to 50-year-olds, given 20-year-olds, given 60-year-olds, given this kind of background, this kind of affiliation, another group that they belong to. What would be relevant to them? Noise. Wow, addressing the horrible noise floor It's not going to get better, right? Clubs to offer RF power line noise equipment and provide help to find bad power lines. That's something. Education of hams on proper grounding and bonding. Help licensees track sources in their homes and apply the appropriate ferrites. Exploring noise canceling technologies. These are some things that we could do. I don't know if you guys have ever been, like me, I use my radio at campsites. And if I'm around a bunch of RVs, I can't use my radio. The minute they turn on their solar panels and get those solar MPPT chargers going, I have noise all over the spectrum I can't deal with. So I have to find my way around them. One of the things I've recommended, and some people, I've done this a couple times on TechNet and when I host, and this comes up and I talk about it. I have people say that's cheating. No, it's not cheating. It's using the technology that we've been trained to use. Transmit locally, listen globally. If you got internet access and you got so much noise, listen via remote receiver and transmit from your Q2H. When I sit in Seattle with my radio, too much noise, I'm deaf. So I go to WebSDR, I tune into a San Francisco receiver, I listen on the WebSDR, and I transmit at my local through my local antenna at my home. The experience notes are really simple. You have to mute your transceiver audio, otherwise it's confusing. Don't forget to adjust the transmit frequency to match where you're listening, which oftentimes I have missed. I've moved the dial on the WebSDR, but forgot to move the dial on my radio at home. So I had to, oops, I'm not transmitting on the wrong frequency. But transmit locally, listen globally. That's something that we can do to help overcome noise. And it's also a way of overcoming people who are saying, I don't want to upgrade. There's too much noise in my area. I know I can't hear anything on shortwave. Well, have you tried this? Go where it's quieter or cancel the noise. So, got noise? Why are we not building a US remote amateur radio network? This problem is not going away. It's going to get worse. Why don't we go for ARDC seed funds and go a long way? Go set up a nationwide remote amateur radio network. You need an antenna somewhere? Great. You got too much noise? Great. Share it. Right now, if you want to use remote hams, it's like, I think I calculated be about $60 an hour. That's ridiculous. I'm lucky because I'm using a remote station. The guy's offering it to me for free. So I'm happy with that, but I'm going to build my own remote station soon. But why not? They don't have to be super stations. They don't have to be, multi-band Yagis. They could be simple off-center fed dipoles with a radio, but they're in a quieter area. So we can maintain the hobby when we have high noise conditions. So why not? Where's the ARL? Let's do this, And a cheap, easy to build audio frequency phase-based noise canceling system on a USB stick, where audio from receiver 1 is used to cancel noise on transceiver's reception through a phase change. Hey, not hard to do. There's a basic schematic right there. Probably have to build one of these soon. But essentially, it's all doable. It can be done in software. It could be done in hardware software. But these things can overcome some noise. It won't overcome all noise, but some noise, at least extend your ability to operate in some places that are not operating right now. Again, how to keep active in the hobby, how to keep yourself being able to use the hobby. You got to overcome noise in some way so you get out there on the airwaves. I'll skip this for now for time because it's just, and then this same thing is how do we increase the people working at the club from 5 to 15%? Some basic ideas. Again, I'm just asking people, here's a question, take time to brainstorm what you could do. So here's one, give or pay. This is not an unusual thing. It's called give or get in some institutions. 2-tiered membership fees where after the first year, you pay your first year, $49, $12, $15, whatever it is. And the amount of time you put in to support the club from the future thereon generates a percentage reduction in yearly dues. So if you're an officer of the club, okay, your dues are not $15 or $10. Or maybe there's no dues at all if you're an officer of the club. Something that motivates people to have an advantage of helping out in the club. Partner with high school age groups like Explore Scouts to allow them to help on various projects even without a license. Especially as we're getting older and doing field day setups, we need stronger backs than us sometimes, so we need to find some people to help. Allow non-ham family members or friends of members to hold administrative and committee positions. Not everything we do in the ham club needs a ham radio operator to do it. Maybe there's somebody who would like to help, but they don't necessarily want a license. And as I said, merged clubs that are geographically close to gain economy of scale. So what I wanted to present was just the idea tonight of here, and I went a bit long. Apologize. That's the nature of me. Um, I want to present this idea of we know the threats. What are we going to do about it? What's the next steps to do something about it? And I just wanted to start the thinking. And from the thinking, hopefully, will come steps that each person and each individual club can take to mitigate the fall in the numbers of people in the hobby. So again, I want to thank you for your time, and it'll be open up for any discussion right now. And then again, really, as I just said, the next steps are up to you. They're up to me too, but they're up to all of us. So I appreciate the time, and I'm open for any questions or comments, anything you'd like to throw out together.
Thank you. I mean, it's yeah, I think this presentation hit a lot of the challenges we're facing right on the head, and it's if we don't start talking about it, well, we're never going to address it. So I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us.
Thank you, Chris.
And yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think we could do some rebranding on our end too, because we are known as the Snoqualmie Valley Amateur Radio Club, and that we could change that to the Snoqualmie Valley Radio Club to be more inclusive to people, FRS and just interested, CB, whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Lynn, I'm going to ask you a strange question. Being the well-experienced person here and also exposed to ARL things, what do you think of what I've been saying with regards to the ARL? If you want to go on the limb.
Have you ever noticed Lynn the hesitate to go out on a limb?
Got audio. Well, I'll tell you, they're hurting back there. I hold two positions. I'm the Western Washington Affiliated Club Coordinator, and I'm also an Assistant Division Director. And I've been getting a lot of complaints from clubs about lack of action on updates for their special services club, stuff like this. And some of this has gone on for months. They lost a couple of very key members late last year and have not replaced them. And the workload seems to be tremendous. I think personally that they're in trouble. I really do. The huge electronics out here a couple of years ago, things were just paralyzed and away you go. Everything's set, and it took months to catch up, and a lot of things were never redone.
Yeah, and I also think that, especially since I read the last notes that came with the email, is ARL is seeing their revenues dropping.
Yep.
And therefore they do what other business has to do. They start cutting back services and people are not being rehired to do things. So they need to start, I think they need to take a lesson. You know, we may say good things and bad things about the Red Cross, and because any organization that size has good things and bad things, there's no not and but the Red Cross they could take a lesson from, which is how to utilize volunteers.
Yeah.
The ARL does not think that way, in my opinion. There's lots of talent out there, and they're just, they hold it close to the vest. They don't want to open it up.
Well, something that has hit me kind of hard lately, they have got an organizational structure that's over 100 years old. And they set up sections and divisions over 100 years ago, back when that radio was done on CW. And who works for who? The section managers don't have a boss, really. The division directors are not their supervisors. I also find that the majority of the volunteers that hold at least section positions are completely inert. They don't do stuff. And that's just flat bad news.
Well, as we're saying, anyone who is involved in ham radio at any level of a club or a position, etc., the handwriting is obviously on the wall.
Yep.
And you can put your head in the sand. That's okay. It's a choice. Or you can try again to mitigate the rate of loss. We have to accept the fact that you're not going to have 755,000 amateur radio operators in 20 years.
Yeah.
But you can reduce the rate of decline if you want, but you cannot sit on your hands to do that.
I agree.
So anyway, I have believe it or not, another appointment I have to get to, but I really wanted to say thank you again for letting me talk. If you have anything besides me fixing spelling errors in some English, if you have anything you'd like to any comments or anything you'd like to share about the presentation, you can reach me at my call sign W7DAO at ARL.net.